Okay. So my focus this afternoon is to really, we want to walk out of here with some decisions. Specifically, what we're going to be looking at is identifying all the different services that you offer. So when I say a service, I mean an individual service. So an individual service are things like rentals, an individual program, an individual membership. So we're going to look at identifying what those are as part of this process. And then we're going to look at grouping those services into what we call service areas. So the classic example is, I don't know if it's a classic example, but an example is, say, aquatics, arts and pottery, dance, health and wellness, those types of areas. And if we go to your website, you have some of those areas already identified. So this is one way we can group your services. The other way we look at this is, so those are what we call like course or program related services. We also look at identifying individual facilities. So you can think of a physical address as a facility service area, if you will. So each individual park, each individual rec center, each individual historical site. We could drill down to that level, or we can start to group things together. But what we'll want to do is look at what are the services that we want to analyze for this process. How do we want to group them? How are we going to link a budget to them? And then eventually, we're going to tie all that back into your stoplight model. So we're going to categorize all those services by the stoplight model itself. That's more the work that Leon and Austin will be doing with you. I'm more here to really grasp the financial part of this. So one of the things I'll say is that one of the things that we want to keep in mind, and maybe we can talk about it right now, is you guys have a $275 million budget. That's a lot to analyze. So my suggestion has always been, and especially with large budgets like this, is to think about, are there areas that are the low-hanging fruit, and/or are there areas that kind of got this process off the ground that you want to look at specifically, and can we pull those areas out of the bigger budget and just analyze those to begin with? Because I think the smaller we bite off the first go round, the better everybody's going to understand it, the easier it's going to be, and the more you're going to get out of it at the end of the day. Because if we bite off too much, too soon, too quickly, it could be just overwhelming for everybody, and a year from now you'll be like, why did we even do that project? I don't want that to be the case. So one of the first questions we want to ask ourselves is there a way to identify areas that we really want to analyze throughout this process that will tie back to the stoplight model? One of the suggestions one of the things that Edith and I talked about is maybe we look at a specific fund. You have four different types of funds within your budget. If we just grabbed one of the funds and pulled that out, could we just do that and leave those other three for the next year or the year after that type of thing? So I'm throwing this question out onto the table for discussion. Are there areas that you want to look at specifying, yes, we want to identify or analyze this area? Is it by fund? Is it by programs only, like all programs but just programs? All facilities but just facilities? So I'll throw that out to the group.
I thought that we had a conversation about that, and that was identified in the RFP, what services and or programs that I thought there was a list in there. Do you happen to have that copy?
Yeah, they put the list in.
Well, no, our not their response, our.
No. In the response, they pulled the same list that we had. Recreation programs.
But what I'm saying is, like, even within that list, though, because we can do everything and anything you want.
I think that's a good
starting point.
Just recap.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you're right. Maybe that's too, but it will give us so initially what we had requested was blah blah blah.
Recreation programs.
I know, but the sentence starts over here. Well, that's for the pricing. Okay, so pricing alternatives for, no, that's not what I'm looking for. That's for pricing. There was, in our document, it talked about service. We
Okay.
talked about service or programs, and I'm not saying but maybe that gives us a starting point since we've already had those discussions.
Let me get mine.
And again, it's not to say that we can't do everything. It's just more about, I want to make sure that
Prioritize.
let's prioritize, because this is, generally when you do some type of financial analysis, you want to do a minimum of 3 years. And that's to say that to get any kind of trend data, to get any kind of understanding between, like, you know, because the economy goes up and down, programs start and finish, you want to have some type of, you know, 3 years to look at for your analysis. So, and that's to say too that you could start with this part of your budget, add the other part later on, knowing that it wasn't in the first year, but you're starting to build it throughout the years. And so I'll let people look for that as we're going through this. But is there, if I throw that question out there, is there, while we're waiting for this other information, does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that?
Oh, well, maybe this is part of it, but I'm assuming this is what you call a baseline analysis of cost recovery. Is that what you're working on? So in the recreation, so there was recreation programs as one of them, and then there were subcategories. And the subcategories, this must have come from our document, were fitness programs, aquatics programs, art programs, which are separate than the historic and cultural programs, nature programs, history programs, camps, playgrounds, safe summer, developmental sports, competitive sports, safe summer thing, lifestyle and learning, therapeutic recreation, licensed childcare, festivals, birthday parties, trips and excursions, mobile, elegant settings, showplace arena, and special events. So that was all under programming. Separate bullet is field use. Separate bullet would be picnic shelters. Separate bullet, park building rentals. Separate bullet, community center general use, meaning how much does it cost basically to open the spaces in the facility, and then aquatics general use, indoor pool versus outdoor pool versus. So as you said, that is enormous. And so that's what initially we said, and so I guess we have to determine the priority and how we would start the process.
And again, we can do everything and anything. I just wanted to throw it out there on the table to say, if you think that that's going to take a year to do, and it's going to be so much that staff's never going to, it's going to be over such a long period of time that staff's never going to remember it, we can do it all, but how good is it at the end of the day if no one's going to remember it? And
Shauna, didn't we at one point have a separation in a couple of our conversations, at least initially, where we were really focusing on programmatic things versus rentals? I mean, could that be one separation? That rentals is kind of, not gets kicked to the curb, but because there's so many different aspects in all these things, but there's so many different dynamics with rentals that, would that be one way to start the separation?
well, let me ask you this: of all that list, is that $275 million budget?
Just
Of all of this?
missing.
No. No. That's not even probably half of it. That has nothing to do with it. Maintenance, I mean.
Well,
and there's-
But, well, when I say that, so let me back up a little bit. So there are services that you offer, and there's mechanisms to provide those services. So a mechanism to provide the service is the maintenance. It's the administration.
But none
It's,
of this has to do with the upkeep of our parks, which is a huge.
right. But what my point is that I just don't want to make sure, I want to make sure that if you looked at, say, aquatics, that everything that goes into that, if it's not just the
Right,
instructors.
support. We
Yeah,
understand
okay.
Yeah, I mean, we could start with recreation program, but still that is voluminous if you.
Oh, I agree.
look
I think
at
that's
cost.
just the start of where you start
Right.
cutting our pie up. But I think we want representation from all of the divisions, so we don't want to eliminate anybody just because we're cutting our pie up, if that makes sense.
Right.
We think we found
And I
it.
would think all the divisions would have programmatic aspects. I mean, I can't.
Right,
other
but
than-
for example, if we picked aquatics, it would really limit to, and that's probably a good one to start, but it would eliminate every division but one.
Right. And it would be all day long.
So Edith, when a different section we found was where it's the performing a baseline cost recovery for fitness programs, and then it lists like 20 field use, picnic shelters, park buildings, community center, and aquatics, that we do the baseline analysis. So then we talked about maybe starting with recreational programming, but even in that list, there's
A lot.
Well, one of the things that, and Edith and I talked a little bit about this earlier too, is that we could look at, because my system looks at facilities from a facility rental perspective. So we analyze the facility, and we'll get into what that all looks like and means. And then we analyze programs, but we also charge the programs to use your own facilities, and we'll get into what that looks like. And then we also look at the membership, so daily drop-ins, punch cards, annual passes, all that kind of stuff, to those facilities themselves. And so I'm going to start with an example to give you some context before I get down into the data here. But the example is so you have a rec center that costs $1 million a year to operate. And that's everything, right? That's all the way up to including admin level indirect. So all the way up to director level, HR, finance, all that kind of stuff. So we've figured out that that's what it costs to run that facility. So the first thing that the system does is it says, do you rent that facility out? Most likely you rent, not all of it, but some of it. So we're going to look at what is the projected revenue you can get back into that facility. So let's say it's $100,000. So we're projecting that we can bring in $100,000 of rental revenue. So that means there's still $900,000 left over that is being subsidized. The next thing that the system looks at is we're going to attach the programs that use that facility to the facility and charge those programs to use the facility. So for example, if you have a swim class, a dance class, a fitness class that uses that facility, the system will figure out what it costs per hour to run that facility and then charge that program the per hour cost to use that facility.
So in theory, you're coming up with a specific indirect cost for each individual facility.
Direct, well, I look at a program using a facility as a direct cost because to the program. It's a direct cost to the program.
To the program, but it's like you said, it's all the administrative costs up to the direct.
Yes, well, so let's say we figured out that it costs $10 per lap lane. Within that $10 is the direct and indirect cost to the facility, but every other cost above that too is made up to that $10. And I can actually show you, I have reports that actually separate out all those costs so you can see each one individually. But the point being is that we've made $100,000 in rental revenue, and now we're going to charge programs to use that facility. And let's just say we bring in another $100,000 from your programs being charged to use those facilities. So what's left over is $800,000. So you can either subsidize the remainder of that facility, that $800,000, or the system asks, what do you want to do with that money? And we can say, well, I want to take all or portion of that $800,000 and apply it to become the membership expense. So now you have an expense towards the drop-ins and your annual passes and whatnot. So at the end of the day, let's say you can bring in only $400,000 in revenue from memberships. So at the end of the day, you still only have $400,000 in subsidy, but you have $600,000 in revenue. I use revenue because we don't like to say revenue in our business, but revenue for that facility. So that's in a nutshell kind of what the system does. But to do all that, we need to identify what first are the services that we want to analyze, and then we also need to identify what are the expenses to those services.
So at the end of the day, when we get all this data, so at the end of the day, I'm XYZ facility, and I know that we're subsidizing me the $400,000 after we take it. How does that move me forward? So what am I going to do with that?
Let me come back to that, because I can answer that. We answered that this morning. I want to come back to that because I want to make sure that everything I just said, I'm going to actually take you through an example, walk you through it so you can see it step by step, and then we'll get to that part of the question. So don't let me forget that. Yeah, okay, good. All right, so I want to take you through an example, step by step, of kind of everything that I just said, so that it can really, it's not going to really sink in, but at least you'll see it visually, and you can kind of start to get the representation of what is the data that we need from RecTrack. What is the data we need from your finance system? What is your staff, what is the expectations of your staff to maybe help gather some of that data? Because I know you guys just moved over into RecTrack last year. So I've already been talking to LD, I want to say DL, but LD, of, there might be a couple months of data that's not in RecTrack that we're going to need to analyze this. But this all comes back to that question that we need to answer before we leave today is, what are we going to analyze? So keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking through this, okay? So there's a document out there, and if it hasn't already been given to you, we will make sure you'll get this document, so that this will actually walk you through the data gathering processes, the steps that we need for the data.
I can send it to you guys.
So we'll be referencing this document here in just a bit. But let's start out with showing you the software itself. So the software it's an online hosted software. So everybody in this room is going to be able to log in. If you want to have other staff be able to log in, they can. But you'll be able to run reports, do all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into how you run reports and all the different reports. That's for the very last visit. Today, I just want to walk you through an example. So I'm going to start with what we call the grand summary report. And I'm going to reference going back and forth from this spreadsheet to the actual software itself. So every department has, you guys have RecTrack, you used to be in class, other people have Active, some people have SigRec, the recreation software. So what I've done from my perspective is I created a pre-formatted Excel spreadsheet, because basically everybody knows Excel. And what I'm going to ask for is that you gather the data that we need to do this project in the Excel format. Luckily in RecTrack, I've worked with Vermont Systems, there's some reports inside RecTrack that say ePrep Solutions. I've already showed the LD that will help you gather the data, so you won't have to spend as much time. But what we start with is as I said earlier, we identify service areas. So again, this goes back to what are the service areas that we're going to analyze. And Melissa, like I said, Melissa's already seen all this information, so she's got an idea of what we're talking about this afternoon. But let's say that we've come down to say, okay, here's the specific facilities what we want to analyze. Here are the specific program areas that we want to analyze. Here are the membership areas that are attached to these facilities above that we want to analyze. So that's one of the decisions that we need to make. And we're going to attach a direct and indirect expense to, and I'm going to use aquatics as the example as we go through this. So aquatics has been identified as a program area, and we've identified that there's an expense of a direct expense and an indirect expense specific to aquatics. Above that, there's all that HR, finance, all that other stuff will be allocated later on. But for now, we've identified here's the aquatics programming, not facilities, programming, and here's the budget that is tied to that. Once we've identified that, we're going to download from RecTrack every single aquatics program that you offered within that fiscal year. So this expense information is for you guys is going to be fiscal year 18. Okay? So that's the expense information. So we're going to want to have the program information that matches that data. So we're going to want to have fiscal year 18 program information. So we're going to download from RecTrack literally every single barcode that you offer for the program that you offered in that fiscal year. And we're going to ask, this is asking for, what day of the week, the start time, end time, class count, mins, max, all that type of information. And in addition to that, where was it located? What facility was it located at? Now, you're going to have programs that probably take place or don't take place at your facilities, maybe take place off-site, so like senior trips, right? They go to a casino or something like that. We just put, if that's the case, we just put off-site, and that's something we can talk about later. But I just wanted to show you that this money that we've identified is linked to every single one of these aquatics programs. And you can see in this example that there are a lot. 591 total aquatics programs. So once we've identified all that, we're going to upload that into the past software. And what this report is that you're seeing right now is that direct and indirect expense that we started with is right here. So the total of that direct and indirect totals $297,000. And then we're going to add all that other level indirect. And the system does it automatically by percent of budget. So if aquatics was 10% of the indirect, it's going to get 10% of the total indirect expense. So that's what this $375,000 is. In addition to that, we're going to charge that program to use that facility. So again, this goes back to that example when if aquatics is using a swimming pool that you operate and run, we're going to charge that program to use that facility because the system's going to figure out what it costs to use that facility. So I'm assuming this is something that you do not currently do. You don't charge your own programs to use your own facilities. Now, the system allows you to say, charge us the full cost, charge us or 8% of that cost. So you can come back and say, it's $10 per lap lane. We've never charged for this before. Let's start out with 5% or 10% of that, or zero. I mean, you could say zero. But the system allows you to charge yourselves to use your own programs. That's what this expense is. So that gives us a total expense of $419,000. So you can see we went from $297,000 to $375,000 to $419,000. So if you're the aquatics coordinator, that $419,000 number is going to be a little surprising to you because you've been thinking all along it's only $297,000. So I tell this to this group now because I don't want it to be a surprise to anybody down the road. That these are expenses that you haven't been allocating to areas before, but we're going to be allocating them now. That example I gave when you had that $800,000 left over, that's what this column is right here. You can also allocate a subsidy from a program area to become a membership expense. And you're probably thinking, well, why would you do that? Well, if you have an aquatics budget, most likely the lifeguards for that aquatics budget, or for aquatics, is in that aquatics budget and not in the facility budget. Or it could be vice versa. But let's just say it's the lifeguard costs are in the aquatics budget. If there's a subsidy for the aquatics budget after everything's said and done, you can take some of that subsidy and allocate it to become the membership expense. So that's what this column is. So, but I want to just focus on this $419,000 number. So this report here is a program report. So this is, I've already filtered this report. You can filter, so let me take off the filter. So this is a very detailed report. It goes into the direct and indirect expenses per participant for every program that they've offered. But we can filter this. You can think of this area up here as your stoplight categories. We'll get into that here in a minute. But I'm going to filter this report just by aquatics. So in this example, they have 547 programs. And they're literally, again, they're listing every single individual program. If I go to the very last page, page 6, and scroll to the bottom, there's that $419,000 number. So what we've done is we've taken that $419,000 number and we've allocated it to every single program that's out there. And the way we've allocated it, not that you're going to remember this, but I'm going to tell you anyways, the way we allocate these numbers is by percent of participation hours. So what does that mean? So we look at every single program that you offer and we say, okay, it meets for 10 weeks, once a week. So that's 10 hours. And the minimum for that program is 10 people. So that's 100 participation hours. So if 100 participation hours equals 1% of the total participation hours for aquatics, they're going to get 1% of that $419,000. That's how the expense is allocated out. Is it perfect? No. Is it the easiest, quickest, fastest way to figure this out? Yes. So I just tell you this because this is not 100% accurate, but it's 98% accurate, okay? So that's how the money gets distributed out to the different program areas. Any questions on that? I know that was a lot pretty quickly, but I wanted to walk you through the entire example so that you could kind of see from start to finish what happens.
What do you think of that concept, participation hours?
It's based on, just so you know, the reason that we use that algorithm, it was based on the methodology that it includes. It's including instructed hours. So like if you're paying somebody X amount, it's including those hours. It's looking at the usage of the facility hours as well, and then we use the minimum to give us a basis of how many. How much of the expense should be allocated to the individual program. And I'll tell you right now, for this group, it's going to be very important that when we download the information from RetTrack, that the minimums are as accurate as possible. And what I mean by that is that if you're putting one in just to put the number in there, staff is going to have to go back and fix that, because a one minimum could come out to be $1,000. It's going to say, because it's based on minimums, it could be like $1,000 per person, when it really should be, the minimum is really 10, so it's $100 per person. So the minimums is a key factor in this whole scenario.
But let's go back to my question.
So to answer your question, how do you use this information moving forward?
Yes.
One example, another part of this report. Where is it? See this number right here?
$31.
$31.69. Out of the 547 programs, the average per hour cost, not fee, but cost, for all of aquatics is $32.
That's the cost to use the facility? No.
The cost to offer a program in aquatics.
With all of our overhead?
To do all of
Yes.
the 592 with the overhead?
Yep.
Are you going to show
Right,
them the
that's
overhead
right.
one too?
Yeah, I will. Yeah. So the average cost, and this isn't including, it is including facility costs, but the average cost, not the price, but the average cost for aquatics is $32 basically. So that's one pretty good data point moving forward to say if you're going to start a new program, if you want to get rid of a program, all those types of things, but mainly if you're going to start a new program, for aquatics it's $32 basically per hour. Per hour.
Well, that is 32 hours, but you have 10 people in the class, or, so when you run a class and you're doing your cost recovery sheet for learn how to swim, what do they charge, $80? I mean, you only need a half a person in there to cover your costs.
This is per participant.
Oh, you didn't tell me that. I thought it was per hour. That's per participant?
No, you understand. This is a facility. This is a city that has.
8-hour swim lesson is 200 and.
Yeah, it's 100,000 people. It's not as big as you guys, but they have a very large aquatics budget with very few programs, because they have a lot of competitive swim team stuff that's not listed in here. So yes, it's $32 per hour per person. So if you're starting a new program, that's the number you can start with. But that's the cost. That's not the fee.
No, I understand.
Right, but if we're trying to eventually get to a fee
Cost recovery.
of
No.
cost recovery.
Well, your cost recovery, you're in your stoplight model.
This is never gonna be.
Yeah,
We're
the
not trying to get
the
there.
stoplight model for this might be like, oh yeah, you need a 10% cost recovery.
Right.
So then it's $3.20 per hour per person. So if you have a 10-hour program, it comes out the fee should be $32. So don't look at don't be scared by this data. This is just telling you what it costs, not what you're going to charge. That's important.
So my question, and maybe this is just because this is how you have to do it, and that could be the answer, because I don't know that any, at this level, we particularly care about each individual program.
Right.
It aggregates, and that costs like the $31, that's what we want.
Yes.
But you have all this, like, that we're probably never gonna look at.
Yes. So there's over 200 reports in here, and understand that I was a programmer, I was a facility manager, I was a data analyst, and every report in here I created. And it was because at some point in my career, somebody asked me the question, what is this? So I created a report. That means that, but that doesn't mean everybody in here cares about that. Most likely, you're probably gonna use 3 or 4 reports.
Okay.
But if ever the question is asked, there's a report that will give you the answer. Now, all this data that's here can be aggregated. I have a report.
So what we're faced with is the service areas. We need to talk about what service areas we're gonna like to tackle first. We spoke prior to everybody getting here about the challenges of getting expenses when we drill down too deep on the expense side of it. But what you talked about the minimums, that's always been a challenge, and I'm not sure that we've improved with our minimums.
To find out how improved we are.
Yeah, this is just a summary
I
type
like the fact
report.
that
So
it's not based on square footage. 'Cause we tried to do that project, early on when I came, and that was all a nightmare.
Well, what I am an advocate for and what I like is I don't necessarily believe that our department, MNCPPC, needs to necessarily strive to be at the cost recovery levels as other departments. But we can't even get there if we don't know how much it costs to do. So if in aquatics, we have this overall number, I'm gonna use yours, as $32. So maybe that tells us currently we're at a cost recovery rate of 2%. Then we can say, so in the next 3 years, we'd like to get to 5%. And so we have a target, and maybe our targets are much different than industry standards, but I think that's okay because we're funded very differently. But I think our challenge has been, we don't even have a starting point. And so I do think it's good to assess true costs of our programs. My challenge is gonna be, well, hopefully you're gonna tell us about the minimums, because I think that's gonna be very challenging to fix, number one. Number two, we don't have a year's worth of data in RecTrack. So I don't know how far we have to go back and what the challenges will be going back to class.
I can get the data. The
Okay.
data is fine.
So that's not a challenge. And then, like I know why we're here, to kind of figure out where we wanna start with this.
That's the
Because it's and so, like Kathy said, we don't wanna leave divisions out because we start this process and you feel like you're not vested in it, then we're gonna lose you. So we really wanna start tackling things that impact the most people. But how many service areas would you believe are doable?
So from my perspective, I could do one, I can do a million. There's no, it doesn't take any more work from my perspective, the more areas you have. It's more about how much, because if we're gonna collect data, theoretically, if you collect 1 line of data or 100 rows of data, it's the same amount of work. It's more about the budgeting aspect to this, because the budgeting is Melissa's gonna be challenged with deciding, whatever we decide today, she's gonna be challenged with trying to figure out this, and how easy or difficult it is to figure that out at the end of the day. And so one aspect, like one thing we talked about, you have 4 funds. Is it one fund we look at, and does that cover enough of the ground and bring in enough people where we can just look at, say, the recreation fund?
Well, I mean, most of these programs, a lot of the programs are gonna fall in the recreation fund.
Do facilities fall into that fund?
Not all of them.
Some, yeah.
Do enough of them that fall into that fund, would that meet the criteria of bringing enough people in still?
You have a good program, right, Sean, from your area?
Like, are the facilities that you manage in the recreation fund?
Signal on your enterprise.
Kathy, is the facility you manage in the recreation fund? Yours?
Enterprise.
Yours is enterprise.
Yeah, that's.
What about all your facilities?
I have them in all three,
Okay.
but the program-based ones are in the rec fund.
And so maybe we start with programs, because almost every division does programs.
But when going back all the way to the beginning, let's say, and I probably wasn't part of that brainstorming, but where was the pressure or where was the initial conversation like, we really need to know? Was there like this initial, like, gosh, we set prices for classes and we have zero idea how much they really cost per month? Was it classes, or Shauna, you were very much a part of that, or was it festivals, we're losing our shirt every time we put a festival on a weekend in the middle of the county? Or I highly doubt rentals were in there because we typically at least break even on rentals.
But I think we have the
Separate
perception.
place.
We have the perception of breaking even, but I challenge that if we started putting it into the system and we start doing all these overhead costs, that is not the
Wait
case.
till you see the overhead form.
And so I think,
But the fun
from
part, I
an
agree,
executive,
that would you'd be able to pull it, a microcosm, but is it?
so from an executive team level, they're looking at the overall, what our cost recovery is. All of these things roll up into that. So,
Again, I'm not saying we should exclude anything. I'm just saying that I think it'll be more, at the end of the day, it'll be more beneficial if you start, the smaller you start, the better.
well, I think looking at this list, if I may, I think some of it maybe we could pare down for the initial phase. We'll call it phase one. For example, mobile programming, elegant setting rentals. While it's not it's still very important. It's not a program, it's a rental. It almost should be under the rental thing. Let me see. So those are two, that mobile programming. Those are, the
No, I know.
mobile,
I know.
that kind of
I
stuff.
just didn't hear it. I'm sorry.
And again, I'm in no way implying these things are important, birthday parties, trips and excursions, but I think we always all talk about fitness, aquatics, arts, historic and cultural heritage, nature, history, camps, sports. Those are what we always, and so maybe, and that includes all of the divisions. And so maybe if we start with that group of our service areas or programs, we're including all the divisions, we're focusing on programs, and we're hitting those major categories of programming. It's not to say the others are not important. I do believe that.
But
But
then
we're
I think that
disregarding the
changes.
funds that
Yeah.
we're
Okay.
taking the.
Right, I do think that if we limit it to that amount or that set of programs, so to speak, then we have to change what the overall goal says. Like, it can't say, we need to improve our overall cost recovery by 30%. We need to be very specific and narrow down, like, we are working to improve our cost recovery on, revenue gen or programs
I-
in general. Well, right now I feel like it's a overarching goal for cost recovery that we've been given, but this is only looking at a very fine, like a small amount of what.
Oh, I absolutely agree.
So if we can get,
Could we include the facilities that,
At least we could.
where those programs take place? Or are you just only
No,
doing
yeah,
programs? Okay.
absolutely. Yeah, we
Okay.
can, but I 100% agree with you. I in no way feel like we are gonna end this relationship with any cost recovery, maybe rental facilities at 30%, because I think we thought we were meeting cost recovery on many of our programs that we are not. So to say, here's our target, I feel like we're gonna be surprised and we're gonna be, oh, wow. And we're only at 1%, so we're comfortable moving to 5% because all this means is we reduce expenses, but we may have to increase fees. And I don't think we're prepared to increase fees exponentially just because of this. We want to do it strategically, over time, incrementally, and this gives us the baseline to be able to say, we're at 1%, we're comfortable in 2 years getting at 5%, and that's our charge for the staff. And I think the executive team would be very open to that. I just think there's been this perception that some of these things are meeting cost recovery, and I
Well,
think when they see the data.
And understand too, this isn't about raising fees. This is about understanding what it costs to offer your services. What you decide to do with that information is you could lower your fees, right? You could come and say, hey, we're charging too much. So don't think of this as raising fees. That has, that's
just opening our eyes.
yeah. Okay.
And looking at how it's also comparing to what we've already, where we think things fit in the stoplight model.
Agreed.
And we may have some real eye-openers there that can't be there for various reasons.
And so, and to go on that point, and I want to, there's one other point I'll make after that, is that to hit on the stoplight model really quick. So one of the aspects to this is that we will be assigning, once, the stoplight model is going to be happening in tandem with this work. So they're going to be on a parallel track to say, we're going to be gathering the data, and Melissa's going to be gathering data, we're going to be gathering on this data to look at it. But we're also going to be talking about going into the stoplight model and seeing if we have to refine it or whatever else. Once that's finalized, we will be attaching, you can think of this is what I call a service category. That is your stoplight model. So we will be assigning whatever level each of the, where the program or the facility or the membership falls on the stoplight model, we'll be assigning that inside this Excel spreadsheet to then be able to give you the information both by program or facility, like current cost recovery, and by the stoplight model. So the report I'm running right now, so this column right here is your stoplight model, essentially. So this client, they have a C, an R, and an E. So you can think of this as red, green, and yellow, or red, yellow, and green. So C for them stands for community, which is their lowest, like the heaviest subsidized program areas. R is their middle one, which means recreation. And E is exclusive, so things like personal training and competitive swim programs, things like that. Now they have subcategories, and you guys might find that you might have a couple of subcategories within yours, but essentially it's the same model that you have. And what this report does is it shows you what your actual revenue was, which we'll be getting most of it, if not all of that, from RecTrack and or maybe class. We'll be telling you what the expense is by those categories, and then we'll be showing you the min, max, and average current cost recovery levels by category. So what this system will do is we're going to say, you can pull out aquatics, and I can give you individually, I can tell you for every single individual class that you offered, I can give you the current cost recovery and the projected cost recovery of that individual program. I can roll that up into just aquatics. I can roll that up into aquatics at certain facilities. I can then also roll that up into the stoplight model. But within the stoplight model, aquatics might be in all three levels. Aquatics isn't going to fall, all of aquatics isn't going to fall into one level. It could fall in all three. So if I click on one of these categories, so let's say R6. So within this category, there are 1,100 programs. And they fall, so these are all the different areas that fall here. So these are, you can see they're all different attached here. So it's not just aquatics, it's everything. But within these areas, the importance of this column here is to show you where you're at today, or where you were at, sorry, historically. So, because that's the number that's going to help you decide where you want to go in the future. So if your C, if you're say this is your yellow, I guess, is at 41% here, you're not going to say let's be at 80%. You're also not going to say let's be at 0%. You're probably going to say, if we were to, you can see what they did. They say they went 5, 10, 25, 40, 50. This is what they want. This is where their goal is. That's what they want their goal to be for every program within those areas.
So go back to that second one, the 41.93%. They want to go down to 15%?
Well, this is a weighted average. So there's probably one program in here. Let me just click on it. Yeah, there's only one thing in here.
Okay.
So this is expand is their programs for, it's therapeutic recreation, basically.
Okay.
So this one specific program is just, it's making.
They're comfortable, right, at 15, they just happen to make 40.
Right, so this is that example I gave a little bit, like 5 seconds ago, right? They could lower the fee.
Mm-hmm. They don't always have to offer.
They don't have to up the fee, they could lower the fee.
Right. So I think that report that you just shared, that one right there is going to be very helpful for us.
And this is just programs. I have the same report for facilities and I have the same report for memberships.
I wanted to talk about that. So let's say one of our service categories, and we do have a department goal to increase health and wellness, and so there we have all action plans, and so that is very important. So let's say a service category is health and wellness and all the fitness programmings that go along with that. Then I have a particular facility that has many health and wellness classes. So I can see the cost of health and wellness, that hourly 31 point whatever for health and wellness, but then also what it costs for health and wellness at XYZ facility?
Yes.
Is that? I'm sorry for all the questions.
It's okay.
So this is that same report. So let's go back to that here's that 3169.
Okay.
So this is just aquatics. But what I can then do, because we've attached all the programs to this, is I can filter this by, say, the North Boulder Rec Center.
Okay.
So at the North Boulder Rec Center, that number is, let me find it here.
3135?
So it's gone down a little bit. But I could do it for the other ones too.
Okay.
So, but yes, I can
So
look at
you're
it by
seeing-
facility too if you want
But
to.
you're seeing those same classes in two separate parts of the report, on the health and wellness part of the report and the facility part. You're seeing the classes in both places.
Yeah, so think of the filters in this way. I can look at it from a program area, so I can look at it from aquatics. I can look at it from your stoplight model, and I can look at it from facility, and I can look at any combination of those.
Okay. So my proposal is definitely going to be the listing of our facilities and then the major categories of sub-programs that we own. I think that's a good start.
And is that, if you had to guess, what is that out of the $275 million budget?
Oh,
Ask
Melissa.
Okay. Well, the reason I go there is because there's another aspect to this that Edith keeps asking me to show you. So I want to show you that next part, because this is the admin upper level indirect aspect to how of this money. So let's say what you just said comes out to be $100 million. There's probably going to be, I'm just going to guess, $50 million of administrative overhead that is tied to that. So that's the other thing that Melissa's going to have to determine. So I want to make sure that it's not just, here's what we want to analyze. It's not only is here's what we want to analyze, but what is the admin level indirect that gets tied to that as well.
But what I also have, I understand that we're going to be able to get, energy costs and that kind of stuff. But then there's that other stuff, like we have maintenance costs that mow the lawn.
Right.
That sit outside of that facility and plant the flowers and all of that. So where do we see that in here? I'm gonna stop
So
talking.
No, he's gonna bring you there anyway.
these are great questions. I'm sure if, they're good questions. So the idea behind this spreadsheet when we gathered the data was to try to make it as simple as possible. And so,
Oh, I see that.
well, believe me, when I first started this, it was 10 times harder.
Okay.
I used to ask for GLs and object codes, and yeah, I was like, shouldn't have gone there. So that said, now I only ask for direct and indirect, and then I ask for the admin level indirect. So this is the admin level indirect. Visually, what this looks like is this right here. So you can think about level 1, level 2, and level 3. So let me walk through an example. So level 1 indirect, at the very top, this one up here. This is director, HR, finance, marketing, anything that's going to be distributed or should be distributed to everything below it. Make sense? So it's the top level of everything, right? It's generally HR, finance, marketing, director, that type of stuff.
Let me just stop you there.
Yep.
So, and I'm going to make a nice easy number. This isn't realistic. So in finance, the salaries are $100,000. Clearly they're not, because we have a lot of people in finance. So how are you deciding how much of that to put on one facility?
I'm getting to that.
And this morning, you should know that Melissa is trying to understand too what portion of CAS we have to account.
Well, that's what I was getting
Particularly
at.
from the budget side at this administrative, one of these three tiers.
Well, we do know that there is a percentage, it's like, and every year it changes. It's very small, so it's not really 50-50, it's 49 point, something. And so but that's what I was getting at, that our finance isn't, we're a bi-county agency, so it's not distributed amongst all of our facilities, but in another county as well. So you already.
So yeah, again, this isn't 100%, we're gonna get you to 98%. So let me walk through the example and it'll hopefully make sense here in just a second. But actually I wanna go back here. So let me go back to this. Okay, so we start at the top. So this is, so again, because we might only be doing $100 million, we have to think about what is at the top. What should be included at the top, right? And that's stuff we'll have to work with Melissa on, but let's say we figured that out and we figured out what's gonna be on top. Underneath that is we generally break it up into, say, like, this could be rec programs and rec facilities, it could be parks, it could be rec, it could be anything you want. These are just placeholders. Okay. So then anything underneath this gets directed this way and this way. Underneath this, we have 4 levels. So we could have recreation programs and recreation facilities. And so underneath that, then you have aquatics. Okay. So now what happens, let's work backwards. So let me show you, and I want to get to the right report here. So let me, where is it? Okay, so for aquatics, we got direct and indirect, right? We got that $297,000. We figured that out. If that $297,000 is 10% of all of these things totaled up, they're going to get 10%, they're going to be charged 10% of this level 3 indirect. So what we're doing is we're doing a generally accepted accounting principle way of doing allocations, and it's allocation by percent of budget. And so what we're saying is that if you're 10%, if aquatics is 10% of the budget at this level, they're going to get 10% of the cost allocated to them.
So is there a way to customize the report to that's fine up to our director level, because that makes sense? But once we get into bi-county services, finance, legal, all that stuff that's charged back to us, we need that percentage of 50%, because their cost is 50% in Prince George's County, 50% in Montgomery. And it's not exactly 50, but we're just going to say that.
So the software, so I'm going to answer your question, so let me finish the answer.
Okay.
The software only does percent of budget.
Okay.
What we're saying, what you're asking, I believe, is what we're going to have to work with.
The max salary.
What we're going to have to do is work with Melissa to figure that out manually before we put it into the software.
50% the salary when we input it.
Okay. So aquatics, if they're 10% of all of these things, they get 10% of that.
Okay.
If aquatics is then 5% of this, they're going to get 5% of that. If aquatics is then of all these things is 1% of all this, they're going to get 1% of that. And it's added on and on and on. So what does that look like visually? So here's that 297. They were 10% of that level 3 that we just showed, so they're going to be charged $19,000 in addition to that total there. The next level, level 2, they were 2.84% of the budget, so they're going to get 2.84 of whatever that budget was, which is $15,000. And for the level 1, they were 1.95%. So that's where we get the 375. And then the 419 was the $44,000 of facility cost. So we're getting pretty deep here, but I want to walk through these examples so that you can get a sense of how the process works, what's going to happen to your specific facility or program area. Because if you're thinking, well, my facility costs $300,000 a year to operate, well, at the end of the day, it might be actually $500,000 when you have all these other costs added on top of it. Same thing with programming. So that's kind of the process that we're going to walk through. So it's 3 o'clock now. We've got another hour, but I want to make sure that we've come to a decision. It sounds like we have something on the
They have to.
well, we have something on the table as to what would be the service areas that we analyze.
Edith, is that something you want to review with the executive management?
We would bring that
beyond us?
recommendation to them.
Yeah, this isn't a final decision. It's a recommendation. Yeah.
My only, I guess, concern would be the rental side of it, because I operate Showplace Arena and Equestrian Center, which is heavily subsidized in the enterprise fund. I feel like that facility in particular could benefit heavily from,
We're gonna do all the facilities.
but it's not a program-based facility, so.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't.
Okay,
You
so
can
it's
do
all
it.
rentals. Okay, all right. So I thought we were focusing on like.
No, we're gonna do two.
programs.
We're gonna do all the facilities
Okay.
and all the programs. Some things are gonna fall both places.
Okay.
So for like, your Tai Chi class is gonna fall under the health and wellness report and under the college park report. But there's going to be, each individual facility is gonna have that cost.
Yeah, so let me make sure that you understand that we analyze the facilities first.
Okay.
The first thing that the software does is look at your facilities, because we want to figure out what is the per hour, per unit cost of any facility, so that when we get to the programs, we can actually, if the program uses that facility, we can charge that. But we also want to figure that cost out from a rental perspective and a membership perspective as well. So the first thing that we're going to do, and I'll just show you a report. So this report, what this report is it's listing all their facilities, and you might decide to group similar or like facilities, so like parks. You're not going to list every park. In fact, you might not want to even do parks, but you could. If you do it, I would suggest that maybe you group them together, because most parks, you're looking at probably doing like a picnic shelter or just acreage, right? But you don't want to literally list every park, because then we have to get a fee for an expense for every park. Your rec centers, you probably want a physical location, you probably do have one of those separate. However, if you charge the same rental fee at all your facilities, if it's a similar facility, and the membership, the drop-in and the passes are all the same cost, the same fee, then you might want to just all group them together.
No.
Okay, well, I'm just giving you examples. So having said that, if we look at this report here, so this is a list of their facilities. And again, you can think of these as physical address locations. And what this is showing, so we'll look at, say, the Boulder Reservoir. So this is a lake that they do. They have boating, they have a beach, they do rentals out there, they do birthday parties and weddings. There's a membership to come into it, and they hold programs out there. So here was their actual revenue at that. And this revenue here is rental revenue only. This isn't programs, it isn't memberships, it's only rental revenue. And we discern that when we enter the information. So this is rental revenue. Here was the expense. So this expense is their direct and indirect costs plus all that admin stuff on top. So this is the expense for that facility. So they're currently at a 36% cost recovery rate from a rental perspective only. So we're going to look at this this is only rental perspective so far. Overall, all their facilities are at about 9%. So this is, if you put all their facilities together, they're at about 9% cost recovery. So that example I gave earlier of the steps, like the rentals and then the memberships and all that. So this is actually walking you through that. So they're projecting rental revenue at $476,000. So what they've done is they figured out what the per hour cost is. They figured out what their stoplight model cost recovery rates should be. And if they had the same amount of rentals, this is what they're projecting they would bring in for revenue. Then when the programs use that facility, this is the revenue, and I put that in quotes because we don't like to say revenue. This is the revenue from the programs that the programs would generate. And what's remaining is this, $521,000. So that was that $800,000 I gave you the example there.
That's what we have to subsidize.
So then they decided that they're going to dump all of that into their membership expense. So from a facility perspective, they're at 100% cost recovery from a facility perspective, not from a membership perspective, but from a facility perspective. Now, if we were to go look at the memberships for that facility,
They're gonna be at a pretty low cost of recovery.
well, yeah, we'll be able to determine that. So I'm just gonna, where am I? It's not there, it's not there. Oh, they're part of it, well, let me just, trying to determine if this is the, I want to make sure I'm moving you in the right event. 521. So part of their, so the general memberships can be used at the reservoir, so that money was actually split. So this is not the perfect example, but anyways, you can see that this is general memberships up here. So part of that $521,000 subsidy was dumped into the general memberships. But so what's happening is that you can see for their memberships, here's the cost recovery goal. And for their daily, it's 80%, and for some of their other passes, it's 100%. So what they've done with that $521,000 is they dumped it into the general membership, and for general membership, they have an overall cost recovery goal of 100% cost recovery. So in a sense, that reservoir is a 100% cost recovery facility. Now, is that going to be the case for your facilities? Yes, no, it just depends. On what your stoplight model is going to tell you, and so on and so forth. So
I have two questions, and they may be Dwayne questions. Do we have a way to handle two things? Our membership, and I'm sure you've run across it before, we may sell a membership pass that's good for every community center. So I may buy it here and use it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we do is, and again, we'll download the data from RecTrack, but like, this client, what they've done is they've created a boat membership, specific, and this is boat memberships as well. This is moorings and this is boat memberships. A golf course membership, outdoor, so they have 2 outdoor pools. That's what these memberships are. And then everything else falls into general. So general memberships is they have 3 rec centers, but if you buy a annual pass, you can use the 3 rec centers, the 2 outdoor pools, and the reservoir.
So that it does handle that. And then the other thing is, you talked about when you do the facilities, one of those first numbers was, this is how much it costs, not programs.
Correct.
Okay, so when we pull, we're gonna have to get you that number.
Right, so I talked to Melissa this morning, so you can think about that example I gave you earlier. So you're gonna think of, grab your facility, turn it upside down and shake it.
Right.
Anything that stays there is facility related. Anything that drops out is most likely program related. That's what Melissa's going to do with those budgets. Is she's going to try to figure out what is only facility related costs.
She has a tough job.
It's not going to be easy.
Well, she's down a staff person and we're coming into budget season too.
And that goes back to the question, is there stuff, how much of this do we want to bite off the first go around? And again, these are recommendations that we're going to be taking to the bigger staff meeting, but.
Was this helpful?
What's for me, thank you.
I would recommend that when, you have an electronic version of this too, I'm assuming, yeah?
Yes,
This is just a really short and sweet, here's the data we need and why we need it.
We got that.
There's another version of this that is 3 times as long that goes into every detail that you would ever want to ask. If anybody's interested, I have it.
I'm just gonna ask you.
You know she wants it.
I'll tell you this, I created it. I created it, no one reads it. It's like manuals from RecTrack. You don't read the manuals, right? You just do the work. But it's there. The manuals are there. Other questions?
Will we eventually, I'm assuming, once we have this team and we're working with you and stuff, we'll have a way to communicate?
Yeah, so let me talk about next steps. So once the decision is made as to what are the service areas and we decide that these are the budgets, then it's next steps are start to gather the data. So we'll be working with your staff to say, okay, is this the data we can gather? How much of it do we need? How long is it going to take? My process usually takes anywhere from 2 to 6 months. And the reason I say that is because once we say we could get the data today, it still needs to be given to all of your staff members to say, yes, it's correct, because the minimums are probably wrong, right? They might have entered in the fee for a swim pool to be $5, and that fee, right, really what you're charging is $20. And so it's just, the staff just need to eyeball the data to make sure it's correct. So that's the from the data perspective part of this. The other part of this too will be the stoplight model information that we'll be having side by side. I will be looking at, once the decision's made, to be working with Melissa, and again, if it's you or somebody on your staff.
My name is Nick Herms.
Nick Herms, okay.
That's exactly who you can be working with.
So LD's already kind of looking into it, but Nick Herms, okay.
LD is Nick Herms Supervisor.
Okay. So we'll be doing that in conjunction, but yes, we'll be doing WebExes and phone calls and that type of stuff. And I will be coming back out here with another person who's working on the project with me. He's assigned to me. His name is Jason. He'll be coming out with me probably sometime October-ish to actually go out and talk to some of the staff, to go visit some of the facilities, to get a sense, because we like to have a sense of, when you're giving us the data, we want to see we want to get a visual of the type of data you're giving us. So you guys will love Jason. He's a people person. He'd be making you laugh all day long. But we'll be coming out and working with you, and then that's when we'll be looking at the data in more detail and stuff like that. So, but at the end of this process, I'll be coming out one last time to train you on how to use the software, train you on how to run the reports, train you on how to create your own scenarios. So the data that we put in here is static, but the outcomes are dynamic. And what does that mean? So the raw data is what it is, but the outcomes, what you actually change for the cost recovery levels for the stoplight model, if you're going to decide to charge yourself to use your own facilities, what kind of aspects, how much of that subsidy from the facility do you want to allocate to memberships? Those are all the decisions that you get to make. And each one of you can log in separately to the software and create a scenario based on those decisions. At the end of the day, though, we're going to have one master scenario that is kind of the final scenario to move forward with. And that will be the last time I'd be on site for this part of the process. So, but that's kind of my process next steps. Friday we'll talk more about with Leon and Austin about the other steps, the bigger steps from the stoplight model and all that other kind of stuff. But from my perspective, that's what I do. So.
Any questions? Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.